Hello, hello. Welcome everybody to A Mighty Blaze this wonderful morning. We've got a beautiful book to talk about today with a beautiful new author. Hello, Aimie. Good morning.
Good morning.
So my name is Margaret Pinard, and you may not have seen me on A Mighty Blaze before, so I just wanted to say, hey, I'm historical fiction and fantasy author and booktuber. So if you want to check out the YouTube channel, it's Margaret Pinard. Pretty easy. And I've been with the Blaze since 2020 when they started with Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt. Rescuing stranded authors and books on tour so that they didn't get left behind, and we're still going strong. So welcome to A Mighty Blaze, and nice to meet you all as an interviewer for the first time. So I'm very lucky to be able to talk about a historical fiction for this first interview because it's a book after my own heart. So, Aimie, it's called A Bakery in Paris. And my first question was Bakery Paris. If you had to choose between the two, which is nearer and dearer to your heart?
Oh my gosh, that is like Sophie's choice for me because I am a baker. That is like, I resonate so much with the line in Julie and Julia where she says, in a world a day where nothing, and I mean nothing goes right, it is comforting to know that you can go in your kitchen and mix butter and chocolate and it will get thick. And so, yeah, I resonate
Oh,
with that deep in my soul. So I probably spend more time baking than I do in Paris. I probably spent a grand total of 2 months in Paris of my whole life, but which is not too shabby. But I would probably say baking if I had to choose, as long as we didn't have to get rid of France entirely.
there you go. Good to know. Good to know. I think they're both high class, very enjoyable, satisfying choices. So there's no wrong answer.
Yeah.
But for those who are new to Aimie K. Runyan's work, I wanted to just do her little introduction here to give you some familiarity. She likes to write to celebrate history's unsung heroines. She's been honored as a Historical Novel Society Editor's Choice Selection, a 3-time finalist for the Colorado Book Awards, and a nominee for the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writer of the Year. Aimie is active as an educator and speaker in the writing community and beyond. And she lives in Colorado with husband, adorable children, adorable kitties, and a dragon. So
Yes.
that is a wonderful combination. So I love to hear from people in other time zones. I'm in Portland. You're in Colorado.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. So you're
yeah,
Portland, Oregon, or Portland, Maine?
Oregon.
I went to college near Portland. I went to Linfield College in McMinnville. So
Oh,
you're,
nice.
yeah,
Okay.
I
Wine
love
country.
Oregon. Yeah, Portland's a
Yes.
great city.
Wine country. See, we've got
Yes.
bakery, we've got wine. I mean, all
Yeah,
really
it's all a
smoking hot.
brand. It's all a brand, definitely.
Awesome. Awesome. So tell us a little bit like the elevator pitch about A Bakery in Paris. Who are we following, and what is the conflict that we're going to be seeing?
Okay, so this is I pitched this as Les Miserables meets Chocolat. It really has we have two timelines. In the 1870s, we are following the story of Lisette, who is a privileged young woman who learns about the plight of the common people during the siege of Paris and the following the Paris Commune, and she gives up her life of privilege to follow her ideals and her love, and yeah, and she has a very rough time adjusting to life of a reduced means, and she learns a lot about herself in the process. And our 1946 timeline, we have a young woman named Micheline from the same family who ends up after the war, taking care of her two younger sisters because her father was killed in the early days of the war, as many Frenchmen were, sadly, and her mother went missing in the final days of the war. And so her entire agency for her life has been taken away because her entire existence now at the age of 19 is caring for her younger sisters. And they are women from the same family whose salvation and restoration come in the form of the same small green bakery in Paris.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And that's going to be one of my questions about the green. we were talking about this earlier with Karen in the behind the scenes room and the Paris green. So I wanted to ask about this two storylines, because
Mhm.
sometimes in a dual timeline historical fiction, when you're writing the book, you can feel pulled towards one storyline more than the other, and you sort of have to beef the one up to make it balanced and make it feel like they're both as compelling. So did that happen for you? I think there's
In a roundabout way, because originally this was pitched as a triple timeline. And it
mm,
was going to have a 1990s, because that's the way just the ages worked out. It was going to be 1990s timeline. And I tried and tried, and poor Veronica just was not making the cut. And so, so I actually started most of the time when I've written other multiple narratives or multiple timelines, I intersplice so that, things are easier to mesh up. Right.
mm,
But for this one, I wrote all of Lizette's timeline, and it was glorious fun. I mean, heartbreaking, but glorious fun. And then Micheline, it was, the stakes were there. It was, it was right there. And she was a really compelling character. And I really I really felt comfortable. But it's like, I am already at 80 or 90,000 words with these two timelines. And I tried and tried to make the third one work, and it wasn't. And so I emailed my lovely editor, Tessa at William Moore. I'm like, is it okay if I just cut out that modern day timeline? I know you're not super prescriptive, but I did pitch it that way, and that's a big
right,
change to
right.
make without your say so. She said, if that's what feels right, that's what feels right. So I just bumped up Micheline's a little bit, because I really realized I was running out of word count by the time there. And I worried that it would feel just too much back and forth, and there were such disparate timelines. But when I started splicing them, it really naturally worked together. So, it seems like, no book is like, I would never say that a book is easy to write, but some come easier than others.
Mm,
And this was one that did. I
mm.
mean, especially once I let Veronica go, she's going to get her own book. And
Oh,
actually,
good. Okay.
yeah, she's,
Right.
and it's going to be modern, because I'm actually working on some contemporary stuff, which I'm really excited about. But,
Nice.
I took some of her actual snippets from her scenes, and just like stepping inside a decrepit building and wondering where to start. And I took some of those exact lines and moved them in a completely different project.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, Veronica gets her own book later. But yeah, it just felt so freeing to let her timeline go, because it didn't belong here. It just
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the three timelines thing is in the author's note at the end, which had some very interesting information, including the trip to Paris and the exploration of the bakery that was the inspiration, which was
Mhm.
super fun. Um, so yes, I was wondering about the 90s timeline. I'm glad that person is now shuttled to another project and not lost in the slush pile, because,
Yeah,
we can
she's
have,
a great character. I've got a lot. She lives up here right now, but
yeah.
eventually she will. Yeah, she will get her own book. And what's funny is that building characters is just the part of the job I enjoy. Of the writing. I mean, the research part is like all fun. It's like kid in a candy store. Just let me loose in the 900 section of the library. I'm good. But when it comes to actual craft of writing, developing the characters and making them weird and doing all the, figuring out how they tick, that's just so much fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. So yes, we just had a scrolling banner up that was
Yeah.
talking about a giveaway. So
Oh
we have a giveaway at the end of
yeah.
this interview. So feel free to pop a question in or leave a comment, and you'll be entered to win one. Also, this is on pre-order because we're coming out next Tuesday, August 1st, right? So we're
Yes, exactly. We're what, six
people
days
right.
away?
Yes,
Six
yes.
days.
Is it a madhouse right now, or is it like the calm before the storm?
It's just I at this point I'm just worried about dropping glass balls, juggling and worrying about forgetting a deadline,
Yeah.
or for a blog post or what have you. But I mean, I think the real frenzy will be when I actually hit the road on tour.
Mm,
Which starts on my first event, like in-person event, is here in Estes Park on the 5th, at McDonald Bookshop for anybody who's local. Come on
yay.
by. But then I'll be headed to Salt Lake City on the 7th. So the King's English and
Yay.
facing a book in El Dorado Hills and a couple bookshops in LA, and all the way down to Scottsdale, Arizona, where at the Poison Pen, where I hope not to boil. But yeah, so it's my first actual book tour. So I'm super excited, but I know that that's going to really be the chaotic part. But right now, it's just making sure I don't forget something important and hoping my publicist will remind me, hey, Aimie, you dropped the ball. And yeah,
Yeah.
like they get to be my executive functioning section of my brain for the next few weeks.
There you go. Just like in the novel where you're juggling multiple timelines and multiple
Mhm.
characters, you got to do that for the book tour. There's all these different things. But that sounds really exciting with all the independent bookstores on the way.
Yeah, 8 events, 8 events. So if you come to my social media, you can find out where I'm going to be and what days. So if you're on the West Coast, there's a decent chance I'll be near you,
Nice.
especially California and South.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not coming to Oregon and Washington, which I would love to, but not this time, but
Not this
hopefully in
time.
the future.
Yeah, I saw some projects on the horizon on your website, so that was also great for people to check out.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
so you say Les Miserables, and you've got, I noticed,
Hmm.
found family as a very important sort of anchoring theme to this book in both timelines. And that's
Hmm.
definitely important in, I haven't read the Victor Hugo, but I have seen the musical, so I can like relate those. Is there something that calls to you about that theme that like comes out of something and that's present in your other work? Is that something that comes up again and again?
It is, and you know the found family thing. I think it's so important for because so many of my characters are kind of lost souls, and they maybe are not born into the family that they belong to, and so they find where they belong through friends and romantic partners or just really strong female friendships string throughout my books, and I loved the friendship between Lisette and Pierrine. Um, in the Lisette in the 1870s chapter. But the Paris Commune is an area of historical fiction, the 1870s in Paris, that is not often touched, and it really is. A dramatic period because we talk about the French Revolution as being this wonderful victory, but they lapsed back into monarchy 12 years later.
Mm.
But after the Paris Commune, when the Parisians took control of their own city for 2 months, and it ended in a brutal massacre, it was terrible, absolutely terrible. The backlash, even among the bourgeoisie, was so strong. They're like, "Yeah, that was over the top, and maybe we don't need a monarchy anymore." So even though it was unsuccessful, it ultimately was, and I think that it is an unsung period in Parisian history, and because they never had a monarchy afterward.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and
Or an emperor.
uh,
Or an emperor.
yeah, or an emperor. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. And so, I thought, the whole class struggle is something I don't think that, we talk a lot about race struggle, which is so important, and, gender struggles, which are also clearly evident a lot in my books. But I think class struggle sometimes gets neglected. And that was a really interesting element to delve into in A Baker in Paris.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I know you took the 90s timeline out, but now that
Mhm.
we're in the 2020s and we've got strikes threatening all over the US and we've got like strikes in France and the Gilets jaunes and like that's all in the
Mhm.
news, that class struggle is coming to the fore once again. So you've got rich material to mine for wherever Veronica is headed.
Oh, exactly. And it's wonderful. It's so frustrating to see workers, the average workers, who are asking for such reasonable things, being told that their demands are ludicrous when the CEOs of the corporations are making more in a day than they make in a year.
Right.
And thank goodness for UPS, they got what they were asking for. I've been keeping really close strike. Obviously, I mean, for selfish reasons,
Right,
I'm
I know, I
glad.
was just reflecting on that
Yeah,
very thing. The book industry runs on UPS. Someone pointed out to me, I was like, "Oh my god, you're right."
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they were asking for AC in their trucks, and we're in the midst of climate change disaster, and that seems like the least that can be done.
Yeah.
So I'm just so glad that that was successful. I have a dear friend who's a pilot, and she was manning the strike center. They were ready to go, and I'm just so happy that they got what they asked for. But that sort of thing, it seems so unrelated, but it's not. It absolutely ties in. The people were being told, you've got emperors living in Versailles with their gilded castle, and you got people starving for bread, and it's a dragon hoarding wealth, and it's pernicious. And for there was a brief period in the 20th century where it looked like we would, the middle class was going to be okay, but we're backsliding, and I really hope we can take it back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was just talking with some other historical fiction authors about people are the same all through history, like the same
Mhm.
problems crop up. And so when you read a line like no one should have to starve, and you do highlight these sort of humanist struggles and things that just repeat in history, that's really important to get to know. Like that's the sense of the novel, is that people exist that are still trying to feed who needs feeding, and like that do still realize that their
Mhm.
lives aren't necessarily meant to go on as they are, like Lizette does, which is brilliant.
Yeah, and Lisette builds the bakery because there was a need for a bakery, and I mean, of course, the price of bread was and still is highly regulated in France because they want people to be able to afford it, which is great. But there, if you have to spend, if you have to walk, because obviously the people in Montmartre did not have, I mean, obviously in this area, they probably wouldn't have even had a horse. And so, walking 20, 30, 40 minutes to buy a loaf of bread. And I mean, bread, we cannot overstate the importance of bread in the French diet in this
Right.
era. They were eating like a pound of bread a day. It's how they subsisted.
Yeah.
Not healthy, but it's how they subsisted, right? And if you look on the map in Montmartre, I chose an actual physical bakery that exists. And if you look, there are not a lot of other bakeries in comfortable walking distance.
Mm.
And so, food deserts are a thing. And, I of course, I can't go back and find out exactly how many bakeries there were in that small corner of Montmartre, but I do not think it was unrealistic to think that there wouldn't have been as many as there would have been in wealthier parts of town, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, and so she was trying to find a way to serve her neighborhood without acting like she was doing charity work.
Exactly. Yeah. Really good
Yeah.
points, again, that are just the same, can be lifted into today's era. So
Yeah.
when you're talking about historical research, I'm one of the favorite things for people to talk about, right? I had a couple that I was just like, oh, I bet this is a story. I bet I can ask her about this. For the rabbit holes. So one of them was the comment about the noble story, because I did study abroad and like learned architecture in Paris and was like wowed by some of the you know imprint that was left. And so obviously
Mhm.
there's Osman and the changes to the city, but there's also like the way that the architecture reflects the values and the current state of society. So when you talk about looking at the storefronts on the street level,
Mhm.
and then the extra high story, it's just called the noble story, and then the
Mhm.
smaller ones for successful but not extravagant middle class folks, and then the servants' quarters and the garrets. And since we're authors, we know about garrets, of course.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Cool.
So yeah, I found that was fascinating when I was looking, okay, so if we look at the Place des Vosges, which is where Lisette's family was from, they would own the whole, because it's one of the oldest neighborhoods. Haussmann didn't touch it. Because it was already there and it was fine. I mean, Victor Hugo lived there. I got to visit his house. And I got a picture of the book in front of the house
Oh,
that
nice.
yeah. And so I figured they had a corner, one of the corners, they have a little courtyard, but they would have owned the entire townhouse. But if you look at a proper Haussmann house, buildings, the long row buildings, they are, it's stratified. You've got the shop fronts, the lower story, because the wealthy didn't want to climb the stairs because obviously elevators weren't really a thing,
Right.
or not common. I mean, I can't remember when the elevator was invented, around the same time, but they probably wouldn't have been super common. And these are wealthy people. They don't want to climb all the stairs, like enough to get out of the muck, but not 6 flights. And they stratified, and it was probably been a big deal to live, on the third floor right above, the really posh family. And it was, I just found that super fascinating. I found several websites and books because, again, I was writing this book in 2021 for the most part, and early 2022. I think that's right. And so international travel wasn't quite possible yet. Yeah, because I did my first trip to Europe post pandemic in summer of 22, and things had just opened up a few months before. So most of the book was already written. And so I had to rely on, traditional library research, the internet, and Google Maps. I mean, I lived on Google Street View, and it was, if you can't be there, I mean, and the nice thing is I didn't have to pay for a plane ticket, and I could sit and wander the streets in Montmartre, and not have to jostle other tourists, which was nice. But just to get, because I'd been to Paris, I know this. It was enough to kind of refresh my memory, which was super helpful.
Then there's
So
the details that you don't get
yeah.
even when you visit, which are things like the texture of the road dust and what would have been like making her feet sore. And I was like, oh my
Yep.
gosh, how long did this take to research? And it got one line, but it's perfect.
Yeah, well, and like the one of the last details I added was about the composition of the dirt in the Place des Vosges, and you see it around in the Jardin des Tuileries around Versailles. It's that kind of pretty beige, crunchy dust.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was like the one place where she's able to walk, and it's driving her nuts because of the crunch, crunch, crunch under her boots. And I remember that from my own trips, and so I researched like what is that stuff called, because it seems so unique to Paris, and I can't remember. It's like I can't even remember what it's called now, but in one ear out the other sometimes. But it's
sand, gravel, and whitewash, just like
sand, gravel, and whitewash.
Yeah, I was like, oh, you got me. You got me with the details. It's great.
Yeah, and that was one that I put in copy edits because I'm like, I need a detail there. I need to bring the Place des Vosges to life, because I did get to go. I got to visit right before copy edits came in. So I asked my editor, can I just add in a few details? I know that you're not supposed to really mess with the manuscript too much at this phase. And she said, yeah, that's fine. And I didn't go crazy, but I did. Oh, what wonderful research. It was great. It really was great. But yeah, I wanted to, I sat in the Place des Vosges, because I've gotten to go to France twice since I wrote this book, which is great. But I sat in the Place des Vosges and really kind of took in the ambiance. And then I went in again after, the arcs were already ready. It was just in April. And I ate in an outdoor restaurant in the Place des Vosges, and visited some of the shops and got to see Victor Hugo's house, and really take more of it in, so I can share some of that. I mean, none of it. I think I did enough, but I mean, you can't go overboard because it's not. The descriptions can really weigh down the plot and the pace of the story.
Right? You got something to choose from.
Yeah, but I can share in the social media.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. We're talking about A Bakery in Paris. I'm with Aimie K. Runyan, and this comes out next Tuesday, August 1st. So you can pre-order right now or ask a question for a chance to win a giveaway copy. And one of my questions that I was curious about, which I'd never thought about before, but you have several key objects in this book that are green. And there's this like Paris green that we've used for our branding today in honor of the book.
Love that.
I'm wondering if you know the story behind that, or if you have particular associations with this green. Because when I think of green in books, I think Gatsby and the light at the end of the dock. But
okay, part of it is actually a tribute, because the inspiration for this book, especially the Lisette half, the guy I was dating at the time, I met a really nice guy who was a historian, like 5 minutes before lockdown, and I was newly single, and I decided to date, and I said, I'm like, I was like, do you asking for recommendations about books about the Gilded Age? I'm like, what other periods do you think I should explore? And he said, what about the Paris Commune? You're a French historian, French history person. I said, that's a good idea. And so I kind of ran with it.
And then very similar. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I married him. So that was a nice turn of events. But his birthstone is emerald. And so it's a small tribute to Jeremy. But the ring the engagement ring that she gets from her, because diamonds weren't quite as common, I thought I'd go for emerald, for him to give her, because it was associated with wealth and extravagance. And I like the idea of taking something that was a symbol of wealth and extravagance and turning it into something practical. And that, because I think that my husband, being the ruthlessly practical person, he'd appreciate that too. But it's a subtle tribute to him, as well as I thought it was a striking visual. And I love the idea of her cashing that ring in. And one of the funny things is I struggled, because it's a bakery in Paris, and when I started writing, I'm like, what am I going to call the bakery? And it's one of those things like, you gotta have a good name. And a lot of the bakeries in Paris don't have, it's like Shea whatever, somebody's last name, whatever,
or Ireland, it's like whatever.
Yeah, exactly. yeah, it's they're not super distinctive names. Like, we have super cute names for bakeries, like You Need Pie here in Estes Park.
Right.
Yeah, and or Sweet Treats or what have you. That's not a French thing to do. So I'm like, what would be a good name for a French bakery? But then I came up with the idea of her hawking her engagement ring to buy it,
Mm,
and Le Bijou just kind of, yeah, which means gem,
right.
just popped into my head. And I'm like, that works. That works. I was texting with Kate Quinn at the time. I'm like, Kate, I finally cracked the code.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And then there's the green linen dress that she makes. And then there's the hunter green
Yes.
she's married in. And I love how you like dropped in the costume details. That was excellent. I also saw you
Yes.
sew costumes in your website. So like anything from that come into experiment for this book?
Yeah, I do. I haven't had my poor sewing machine is literally 10 feet away collecting dust. I have not sewn since I made masks early in the lockdown. But yeah, it's I do. I think it's important to know what people wore to understand how they moved, and
Right.
to understand, because corsets evolved. I mean, I mean that's an important garment, perhaps the most important garment to understand, because they evolved so much and they affect so much how women moved. And it was different for working class women versus the more upper class women who
Mm-hmm.
wore their corsets tighter and were more extravagant. The working class women, it was back support, and they loved their corsets. They
Mm-hmm.
loved them, and so understanding that. And of course, Lisette being a redhead, I put her in green because I think it looks nice. But also, there's the connections to wealth and extravagance that she doesn't completely divest herself from.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's this period, maybe it's earlier or later, but like the green, there was like a really brilliant green that like, used arsenic, and so that was responsible for poisoning. And they're like these little details that people don't suspect, but are fun to drop
Yep.
in. You also include one of the really cool things, baking recipes. Obviously,
Yes.
you tested these out in your kitchen and got approvals from the household. Is that how it
Uh,
went?
well, these are actually, so for anybody who reads the books, these recipes are adapted from the original carême. I just made them shorter,
Ah,
easier to follow. They're really not modern recipes that you could follow all that. It's like
right,
put it in a hot oven. What the heck is a hot oven?
right, right.
450 degrees, by the way. But yeah, I've made a lot of these things, but I would use a more modern recipe. So if I can take a second to pitch, I'm going to be sharing recipe videos on social media, just reels, to introduce the recipe and give you the ingredients. And then I will lead you to my blog for more detailed instructions on how to make the recipe in detail. Because to make, baking can be complicated, or at least time consuming, even if it isn't complicated. So to do a proper baking video would require like a production studio, and I just don't have the bandwidth to do that. And so I'm going to just talk about the ins and outs of the recipe in a 90-second reel and
Nice.
lead you to my blog, because I don't know about you. I mean, I love watching baking shows. But I mean, I need a paper recipe to follow. So
Yeah.
that's what you'll get from the blog. And the first recipe I can tell you is my dark chocolate cheesecake, which is not in the book, which is
No,
not a particularly French recipe,
French.
but I do jokingly say it was responsible for my marriage. So there you go.
There you go.
Yeah. And, it's a recipe that I make at least once a month. And we eat very, very slowly, tiny little portions, because it's so rich and decadent, but filling in a good way, because of the cheese. And, it's low in sugar, and it's just a great recipe. So follow my socials if you want all that.
Excellent. Yeah. So follow the socials. Also, we're giving a giveaway copy at the end.
Yeah.
So enter a question. I've got one last question I'm going to ask before we
Sure.
hit the audience up. And that is, you have balloons as a method of escape from the siege. And I'm wondering if that is based in fact, and like, how amazing is that?
Yes, I read about it. I'm like, OMG, they used hot air balloons to get out of Paris, and they didn't get shot down, and most of them got out.
Yeah.
I mean, a few were shot down by the Germans, but I found out about that, and when I in the midst of my research, and I actually emailed my editor like, OMG, they used balloons. I'm doing that in the book. And she's like, yeah, you have to.
Cover. Oh my gosh, that's so fun. That's such a fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just one of those details. It's like, this is why writing fiction is fun, because I can just throw that in and I didn't have to make it up.
Right. Like it's real, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. I love that. Okay, so why don't we take an audience question? From Emma Bennett. Hello. What was your
Oh,
favorite piece of research that you weren't able to include?
oh my gosh. Okay. So a little bit, I mean, I touch on it only briefly, but there were women that were accused of being pétroleuses, which is fire, fire women. They would set things on fire during the commune as a means of violence against the French government.
Mm.
And they were treated mercilessly. They were, and so we touch on it only briefly, but it would have been really interesting to have a character that was legitimately involved in that and the risks that they took to inflict damage on the government buildings and to keep the government art troops at bay. But it was already so much. And, if we'd gotten too far into the violence, because we had the siege already, getting too deep in the weeds of the violence of the Paris Commune would have meant that it would have had to be an entirely Lisette book, which I wouldn't have minded.
Right.
But I like Micheline too, and the stories were so interconnected. It got to the point where I couldn't imagine one without the other.
Yeah. You've got interesting character names, and I know people usually ask how you choose character names in English, but like, was there any special thought process for like choosing the French ones, like Micheline, Lisette, Pierrine? I thought Pierrot, like when you're talking about juggling glass balls, I was like, oh, is that related? Like,
no, well, my French name, because I took French all through I have a master's degree in French, and so I took when I was in high school, we all chose French names, and my name was Lise.
Oh, okay.
And so I like Lisette, and I liked making it diminutive, because they were trying to keep her small. They were trying to keep her small.
Yeah, right.
And Micheline, she was Mylène for a long time, and it was too modern. It would be like naming a character from, I don't know, from the 18. It'd been like naming a character from the 1940s Brittany. It just wouldn't fit. Because I think it's like equivalent, almost like Valerie or something. So it's a few decades too recent. So I found Micheline, which is kind of, it's I thought it was more interesting than Michel as a derivative of Michael. And Michael, the meaning of Michael being he who is like God seemed like a lot of pressure. It seemed like a lot of pressure, and I wanted to put that on her shoulders.
There you go.
Yeah, but I thought Micheline was kind of pretty, so it was a nice derivative of that. Pierrine, I just liked. Yeah, and Sébastien, like for the priest Sébastien, it's a name that I always have associated with integrity and honor. I mean, that's just an Aimie thing. And Theodore, I just love that name so much. Yeah.
Good. So personal history. I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
Another audience question. Emma says, have you got your next book planned? And is it set in the same period? Good question.
Yes and yes, actually. My next book is called Mademoiselle Eiffel, which is a story of Claire Eiffel, Gustave Eiffel of Tower fame.
Yeah, yeah.
So her mother died when she was 14, and she took over as her father's assistant in many respects, like running the household, helping to raise her four other younger brothers and sisters. She had two younger brothers, two younger sisters, I think. Wait, hold on. Yeah, two younger brothers, two younger sisters. And obviously I'm juggling a lot of projects, so excuse my frazzledness. But she really was hugely influential in his business and running things for him. And he insisted that she live with him for the rest of her father insisted that Claire live with him for the rest of his natural life. And even though she got married, the couple, she and her husband lived with her dad for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
I mean, this was not a hardship. They had a mansion. This is not, a hard thing.
But emotionally, yeah.
And I found Claire's story when I was looking because I wanted to keep in the same time frame. So the story starts in like 1877 at the death of her mother, and ends up in like 1889, 1890, right around the time the Eiffel Tower is built, with an epilogue, after. Nice. But and a couple chapters after, actually. Yeah. But so yeah, basically just a little bit later, so you can see the aftermath of the Paris Commune, because it became the Belle Époque, the beautiful period where they weren't fighting. Yes, and it was really Paris's golden era, where they were the center of art and culture for the whole world. I mean,
Mm.
now it's New York, but then it was Paris, and um, it was just fascinating to study. And Claire is such a great character, so it really felt like such a great follow-on to A Bakery in Paris.
Yes. And in terms of picking subjects that people will be a sucker for and want to buy and then get pulled into your lovely writing and the story,
Mhm.
like bakeries, bookstores are high on my list, and Belle Epoque and Art Nouveau is right up there as well. So, I mean,
Yeah,
brilliant,
yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that it kind of happened because I picked subjects that I'm interested in as a reader. And, the great thing about the cover is, I mean, and I can say this without, because I didn't make the cover. So isn't it gorgeous, ladies and gentlemen?
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
said, I want a green bakery. I want a green bakery is what I told them. And I said, I want an emerald green. And I mean, honestly, they gave me two concepts and they were both very similar. And we made tiny, like little placement issues. It bumped up the color of the green just a hair, and it was the easiest cover I've ever had to work with. It
Yes,
was
and
so great.
you had the detail in the text about putting the Eiffel Tower because of the sister who is an art person who knew like that would sell more baked goods because everyone likes the Eiffel Tower.
Exactly.
It was
Yeah,
so sweet. Yeah.
yeah. Because when I was talking to my editor Tessa, she's like, "We got to figure out how to put an Eiffel Tower somewhere on the cover." And
Gotta do it.
I'm like, oh, Tessa, I thought of it. Her sister's going to paint it on the window for the tourists. And she's like, do it,
There
write it
you
in. And I love it when you have that opportunity where you can make the cover work for you.
go.
I
Right.
love that. I love that. So this is definitely, and they were so concerned because they care about. They're like, the bakery is really well stocked. Is that okay? I'm like, yes, because I want to draw people in. So it's obviously the 1946 timeline,
Mm,
but that's fine. It's great, and
right.
I think it evokes the soul of the story. And it was just one of those things where the cover was so not a fight at all. It was so great. It was
Right.
so great. And and the funny thing is, we won't have to worry about the Eiffel Tower for the next one. I'm like, you have to. There are Eiffel Towers on so many covers. I mean, from Mademoiselle Eiffel, you
Yeah.
need Eiffel Tower, all of them. Like, I want to see it across the table, or across the storeroom at showroom at Barnes and Noble. Like, bedazzle it. Go
Yes.
for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have an Eiffel Tower themed comment from Jim. Hello, Jim.
Yeah.
He says there's a beautiful bridge on the narrow gauge railway from Borjomi to Bakuriani here in Georgia. It's famous because it was built by Alexandre Gustave Eiffel. So in 1902. That's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about the two big projects that we in the States know about are the Eiffel Tower and the Statue of Liberty, which are great because he helped build the interior structure of the Eiffel Tower. But
Mm,
he was I'm the Statue of Liberty, excuse me. But it was really his bread and butter was building bridges, and he was very good at it. He was
nice.
very good at it. So there are bridges, and his family are dedicated to preserving the bridges that he built. Yeah. Lots
Wow.
in Portugal. There's,
Okay.
there's a scene with him building a bridge in Portugal in the beginning of Mademoiselle Eiffel. Yeah.
So cool. I can't wait for
Yeah.
that. So do we
Yeah.
have one more audience question before we do our giveaway? All right. Is there an author that inspires you?
Oh my goodness, so many. Okay, so if we're starting back, I mean, my two big ones from before I was an author were Margaret Atwood and Ken Follett, because those works were their works, The Handmaid's Tale and Pillars of the Earth, transformed how I read, how what I wanted to write, and my world outlook. I'm not overselling that, especially Handmaid's Tale changed my world outlook quite a bit.
Mm.
But as far as colleagues, oh my gosh, Kate Quinn, Stephanie Dre, Stephanie Thornton, Sonali Dev, Amy Reichert. I mean, I could go on and on.
Yeah.
So many, so many. I am just, and that was one of the best surprises about becoming an author, which happened basically completely by accident. I just decided to write a book, and all of a sudden, here I am. And it's I expected it to be so competitive, and in a way it is, but it is so cooperative in a way I never expected.
Mm.
Just it's all about giving each other a hand up, and helping each other out, and I love that so much.
I had one more question. So you're talking about historical fiction community. You mention in this book and then also in the author's note about neighborhoods that pull together, but you also have a piece where she's walking, I think it's Micheline's part, she's walking through and no one is looking at her. She doesn't know if she can reach out to help people because she just doesn't have anything left in the time of crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you think that leads communities to either pull together or sort of collapse under the pressure of such a tense conflict that you could leave us with?
I think that in times of adversity, we really see what people are made of. And I think, the beautiful thing is the bakery, which is sadly shuttered. It shut 6 weeks before I showed up. But the bake, I cried in the streets of Montmartre because the bakery was closed. But there is a plaque in the courtyard that's still there, dedicated to the commune of Montmartre. And it was the neighborhood organization where they worked together to make sure that their businesses were thriving, the people were taken care of, their schools were doing well. And I love that. And I think that it is something that when faced with challenges, that people can really rise up and show. I mean, I think that in times of plenty, that can show our mettle as well, to making sure that everybody is well taken care of, and that the haves aren't hoarding everything away from the have-nots. But I mean, that's a whole major part of my world philosophy. But I think that the fact that Lisette and Micheline both care so very much about this neighborhood is their great legacy. And I think that it was especially true because Montmartre is pretty far removed from Paris proper. I mean, it's a heck of a trek. I mean, I'm a huge walker, and I ended up taking the subway to get there, the métro, because I got to preserve my feet somehow. And it's up the hill, the butte, and it's quite a trek to get there. And it was really meaningful for me to walk the streets and think about how it was a traditionally very working class neighborhood. I mean, now it's, you've got a lot of tourist establishments. The bakery is now across the street from a Starbucks. And yeah. But I did pop into the Starbucks because I find it fascinating to see how chain stores are different from country to country. So I did pop my head in. Can't get cold brew apparently, but but it was really meaningful because it really did require cooperation, because they couldn't rely on the big, France has this, we think of it as this big centralized government that takes care of the people, but that hasn't always been the case. And these neighborhoods, it wasn't just families, it was neighborhoods banding together to make sure that they as a community were thriving. And I love that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is a good parting lesson. Get to know the people in your neighborhood because, the apocalypse is coming. That's a theme. All right. Let's do a giveaway and see who's going to win a copy of Aimie K. Runyan's A Bakery in Paris.
This one right here. I'll sign it and send it.
Signed. Excellent. Let's see.
Jenna Boom! Absolutely. I'll send Jenna a copy.
There we go. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Co-founder of A Mighty Blaze herself. Love you for stopping in. Thank you, Jenna.
And thank you for doing the, thank you for interviewing. Thank you for having me. And thank you to Jenna and everybody at A Mighty Blaze for creating this wonderful venue.
It's a great group. It's basically like a virtual neighborhood, and we all check in with each other just like Montmartre. And
I love that. I love that.
So. All right. Well, thank you, Aimie, so much for coming on. I'm glad you were my opportunity to debut for A Mighty Blaze. Loved the book. You can pre-order it now. It comes out next Tuesday, August 1st, and she's got a book tour schedule. So if you're in Colorado, Utah, Arizona area, she might be
California. Yep.
Yes, near you. So check it out. And thanks everyone for coming by. Happy reading and take care.